Take our Bibles and turn to Haggai chapter 2. Haggai chapter 2 as we continue our study here in the book of Haggai. Considering our ways. What does that entail? What does that look like? And obviously, as believers in Christ, this is something that we ought to constantly do. Every single day, every single morning. God, I want to consider your ways, not my ways. And Haggai had a message. He had a message to share for the people of Judah. Remember, they have returned from captivity. They have been in captivity and are now back in the land. And for 16 years, an edict has gone forth. And that edict was what? To build the house of the Lord. Cyrus the Great had released the people of Israel back to the land of Judah. And as they returned back to the land, they started, but then stopped. I wonder how much of a picture that is of us. Oftentimes we might start things for God, and then we kind of fade out. We get bogged down with something. We get distracted with other things. And that's really the message that God has given to the people of Judah through the prophet Haggai, to consider your ways. And so, as we continue to look at this book, it's profound, though it's very short. The message is not necessarily always sweet, but it's true. We thank the Lord for that. So, Haggai chapter 2, if you're able to stand, would you stand with me as we begin reading from verse number 10. Haggai chapter 2, beginning at verse number 10. The Bible says, in the 20th day of the 9th month, in the 2nd year of Darius, came the word of the Lord by Haggai the prophet, saying, Thus saith the Lord of hosts, Ask now the priest concerning the law, saying, If one bear holy flesh in the skirt of his garment, and with his skirt do touch bread, or pottage, or wine, or oil, or any meat, shall it be holy? And the priest answered and said, Go. Then said Haggai, If one that is unclean by a dead body touch any of these, shall it be unclean? And the priest answered and said, It shall be unclean. Then answered Haggai and said, So is this people, and so is this nation before me, saith the Lord. And so is every work of their hands, and that which they offer there is unclean. And now I pray you, consider from this day and upward, from before a stone was laid upon a stone in the temple of the Lord, since those days were, when one came to a heap of 20 measures, there were but 10. When one came to the press fat for to draw out 50 vessels out of the press, there were but 20. I smote you with blasting and with mildew and with hail in all the labors of your hands. Yet ye turned not to me, saith the Lord. Consider now, from this day and upward, from the 24th day of the 9th month, even from the day that the foundation of the Lord's temple was laid, consider it. Is the seed yet in the barn? Yea, as yet the vine, and the fig tree, and the pomegranate, and the olive tree hath not brought forth. From this day will I bless you. Let's pray. Father, thank you so much for the Word of God. We thank you for the truth that we have in your Word. God, knowing full well that it is your Word, God, that will guide us, will strengthen us, will give us light and understanding concerning the things of God. Father, we're so thankful and grateful that you have given us your Word through the prophet Haggai. And Lord, this is not just a word for Judah. It's not just a word for the nation of Israel. It's not just a word for people from generations bygone. But God, this is your word, which is so pertinent for us even today. So God, I pray that as we open your word, as we study your word, as we seek the understanding of your word. God, that you would pour us out a blessing. God, may it pierce our hearts where they need to be pierced. God, may it convict us where we need conviction. Father, we pray that as we leave here this morning, God, we would see very clearly, God, the truth of where and why it is you bless your people. Again, thank you for this time. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thank you. You may be seated. All right, so we are nearing the end of the message that God is giving through the prophet Haggai. And throughout these 2 chapters, we have been seeing that there are 3 particular individuals that God is using here. He's using, obviously, the prophet Haggai. But there's also 2 other individuals, one by the name of Zerubbabel. Zerubbabel is kind of the governor. He is the leader of the people of Judah, assigned by the pagan kings. We also have a man by the name of Joshua. Joshua is known as the high priest. And so here you have the national leader, governmental leader in Zerubbabel, as well as the spiritual leaders in the priest of the people, which is Joshua, and the prophet of the people, and that is Haggai. And we see these individuals being brought up again. Verse number 10 kind of gives us the scene of what's going on. Verse 10 says, "In the 24th day of the 9th month, in the 2nd year of Darius, came the word of the Lord by Haggai, saying, Thus saith the Lord of hosts, ask now the priests concerning the law." So Haggai is being given a message specifically to the people, but he's going to begin it with the priests. Now we see very clearly this is the 4th sermon that Haggai is preaching. Just again in review, I know this is a little small for you, but if you look here, we saw the first sermon was on the first day of the 6th month, which was August 29th in 520 BC. The second message was on September 21st, 520 BC. The third message was October 17th, 520 BC. And now here's the 4th message, which is December the 18th, 520 BC. The first message was that they were reflecting the good life, and there was a false content that they had. They weren't really truly satisfied. And then the second message was kind of the response to that first message. And the message was very simple. That is, go and build the house of the Lord. The third message was them rebuilding the temple. And what was happening is that there was a false discontent. Remember, the people looked at it and said, whoa, wait a second. This is nowhere close to what Solomon's temple looked like. They didn't know which way to go. This morning we're going to look at reclaiming God's glory. We're going to see a false expectation that the people are potentially going to fall into. A false expectation. Can I say, far too often do I find this to be true of God's people. I'm looking for God's blessing in what? It ain't coming. I mean, come on. For crying out loud, Lord. I'm reading your word. I'm attending church. I'm praying. Maybe even I'm tithing. And then, God, my life is falling apart. And what? There's a false expectation. It's almost as if I do A, B, C, and D like I just listed out for us. Then what? God has to bless. And so what does that do to us? All it becomes is a checkbox Christianity. Right? I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, or I'm going to do A, B, and C, and voila, boom. I'm going to be a millionaire. I'm never going to have disagreements with my spouse. My children are going to rise up and call me blessed. Right? I mean, life is going to be hunky-dory. It's going to be a bed of roses. There's not going to be any problems whatsoever. And what happens? I built up a false expectation. You know, that's exactly what the people of Judah. Hey! We're going to go back to the land. When we get back to the land, man, we're going to start offering God sacrifices. Because God what? God loves sacrifices. Right? So we're going to start offering sacrifices. What's the problem? There's no temple. Who cares about the temple? We don't care about the temple. All we care about is what? Our house. Make sure that I'm providing for my family. Make sure that I have the nice house that we can rest our head in every single night. And with God, you know what? I'll offer some sacrifices. I'll take some offerings unto God, and what? Everything's going to be wonderful. Let me just show you what God says to them. We'll get back to this. But look at what God says in verse number 17. I smote you with blasting, with mildew, and with hail, in all the labors of your hands. Does that look like God's blessing? Hey, yeah, but what? The people are sacrificing. The people are offering. It would be kind of equivalent to us, but God, I'm reading your word. God, I'm praying. God, I'm tithing. God, I'm attending. God, I'm serving. God, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. And yet what? You're not blessing, you're blasting. But in fact, verse number 16 says what? Since those days when one came to a heap of 20 measures, there were only 10. When you came to the press vat or to the vat to draw out 50 vessels, you're only drawing out 20. God, this does not look like your blessing. And guess what? It's blessing. Why? Because in all reality, there was a false expectation. In essence, what we're looking at this morning is a challenge to guard against misplaced values and misguided expectations, and a call to personal holiness. A call to personal holiness. What's going on here? Here's the simple truth. They're not personally holy. Let me just say it this way. You can come to the church and not be holy. You can throw money in the offering plate and not be holy. Matter of fact, you can serve and not be holy. Said some of the saddest words and some of the scariest words in the scriptures are from Matthew 7. When Jesus says, you preached in my name. You did wonderful works in my name. You performed miracles. And yet, I never knew you. You see, we can go through all the rituals and not be right with God. And what do? We build up a false expectation. So here is a call to personal holiness. Can I just say it this way? What is it that lacks so often within Christianity? A lack of personal holiness. We are so much like the world. This trip we were at up in Amish country, Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. Now, I have theological differences with the Amish. We did an Amish tour of their grounds and one of their houses, and the lady that was giving us the guide of, or the tour of the house just kept repeating. I don't know if everyone else picked up on it. Maybe I just picked up on it a little more because I was preparing for this message, but she just kept repeating. The Amish people, why is it they have no electricity? Why is it that they don't do this, or they try not to wear buttons? Buttons have to be the same color of the shirt so as not to actually see that. Why do they have these kind of clothing and the attire that they have? And again, theologically, I'm not aligned with that. I'm not Amish. I'm not going to be Amish. Okay? But she kept repeating, the reason they do these things is because they believe we are to be separate from the world. That is exactly what God says as well. Now, yes, does it look different for us? Of course it does. For me, to an Amish, they're going to look at me and say, you're very worldly. Right? Because I do drive a car. I do like my electricity. Right? I do like air conditioning. Really do like it. Right? I like some of my comforts. But does that make me worldly? The answer is no. But this is exactly what God says. Turn with me to Leviticus chapter 2. Keep your place here, but look in Leviticus chapter 2. Pastor Nick's read for us from chapter number 10. Let me read those verses again. Chapter 10, verses 10 and 11. I want you to go back to Leviticus chapter 2. But listen to what he says back in chapter 10, verses 10 and 11. He says, and that ye may put difference between holy and unholy, and between unclean and clean. Is God calling us to the Levitical laws today? No, He's not. But is there any different message for us today than the Levitical law? The answer is no. The reality is what? God still wants us to put a difference between that which is clean and that which is unclean, between that which is holy and that which is unholy. Just because we're living in 2019 doesn't mean that, hey, the Levitical code here, the Levitical aspect, the principle that God is getting across is any different for us. God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And if God called His people to be holy in Moses' day, can I say He also calls His people to be holy in our day? There's no difference. Maybe part of the system is different. Leviticus chapter 2. Notice what God says to the people of Israel. Beginning in verse number 1. And when any will offer a meat offering unto the Lord, his offering shall be of fine flour. He shall pour oil upon it, and put frankincense thereon. And he shall bring it to Aaron's sons the priests, and he shall take thereout his handful of flour thereof. He continues to do this. Verse number 11. No meat offering which ye shall bring unto the Lord shall be made with leaven. For ye shall burn no leaven, nor any honey in any offering of the Lord made by fire. As for the oblation of the first fruits, ye shall offer them unto the Lord. But they shall not be burnt on the altar for a sweet savor. And every oblation of thy meat offering shalt thou season with salt. Neither shalt thou suffer the salt of the covenant of thy God to be lacking from thy meat offering. With all thine offering thou shalt offer salt. And if thou offer a meat offering of thy first fruits unto the Lord, thou shalt offer for the meat offering of thy first fruits green ears of corn dried by the fire, even corn beaten out of all full ears. And thou shalt put oil upon it, and lay frankincense thereon. It is a meat offering. And the priest shall burn the memorial of it, part of the beaten corn thereof, and part of the oil thereof, with all the frankincense thereof. It is an offering made by fire unto the Lord. And he continues this in chapter 3. He continues to speak about these offerings. In chapter 4, he continues these commandments. Verse number 1 says in chapter 4, And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, saying, If a soul shall sin through ignorance against any of the commandments of the Lord, guess what? He's still sinning. The point is this. God says, you know what? You don't have to come to the place where you just say, well, you know what? Hey, I didn't know any better. I didn't know that God has specific requirements. Can I say you cannot plead innocence or ignorance when you stand before God? And so the message to Haggai, through Haggai, I should say, to Zerubbabel, to Joshua, and to the people of Judah, is what? Personal holiness. Now, we just read some of these Levitical laws. Aren't you thankful that you're no longer under the Levitical law? Aren't you thankful for the work of Jesus Christ, who fulfilled it? Completely fulfilled it. Thanks be unto God. But does that not mean that God requires personal holiness? The answer is, of course, He does. So, let's look at the message of really what's going on back in Haggai's day. God is going to do something. God is going to share something with them. That is the root of their problems. So what does He do? He begins with a picture. Let's look at the picture that God begins with. Now remember, the dates are important, right? So verse number 10 tells us that this is the 24th day of the 9th month, the second year of Darius. So this is December 18th, which is now almost 2 months after the previous message, which was what? The people are building the house. Right? Remember, they started, the foundation had been laid already. They're now building the house. And what's going on? 2 months have been going on. And man, they're building this house and they're getting a little discouraged. Why? Because man, this doesn't come close to comparing with Solomon's temple. But they're still building. So verse number 11. So the Lord said, speak to the priests. Go to the priests. And I want you to ask the priests some questions. What are they? Number 1, verse number 12. If one bear holy flesh in the skirt of his garment, now you have to think Levitical law, okay? If one bear holy flesh in the skirt of his garment, and with his skirt do touch bread, or pottage, or wine, or oil, or any meat, shall it be holy? God is coming to them and He's asking or addressing a question to them that they certainly know the answer to. These two illustrations, again drawn from Levitical law, are what? Number 1. If food that is being carried on a garment, the skirt of this garment, in any way touches something that is unclean. Remember what God says. There is to be a difference between clean and unclean, between holy and unholy. Right? Very clearly, if this holy garment that is carrying this holy food rubs against an unholy thing, does the holy thing make the unholy thing clean? Verse 12, the priest answered and said, no. That is this. Does you sitting in church right now make you holy with God? You thinking, oh man, yeah, hey, I'm going to dress up, I'm going to put on my nicest clothes, and I'm going to sit in the pew, and I'm going to hear a sermon, and everything's going to be hunky-dory with my God. It's going to be just fine. Because bless God, I went to church. And that sanctuary, that pew that I sat in, is holy. And I'll become holy. The priest said, for the Levitical law, Haggai? Nope. You're right. So, number 1, food touched by a garment, carrying consecrated or holy meat, did not become consecrated or holy. You understand that truth? Does sitting in a garage make you a car? Right? You can sit in your garage all day long, and can I say, you will never become a car. You can make all the sound. Right? And guess what? You're not a car, you're an idiot. That's tucked in the Greek and Hebrew and Aramaic, okay? Number two. Question number two. Okay, priest, you got it? All right, verse 13. Next question. If one that is unclean by a dead body touch any of these, shall it be unclean? Again, if one that is unclean by a dead body touch any of these, the clean, the holy, the consecrated, shall it be unclean? And the priest answered, yeah, guess what? It's still unclean. So the second part of this is what? That same food, the holy, the consecrated food, however, would become unclean if it was touched by someone who was unclean. Can I just point it out this way or say it like this? God says, okay, here you are, you're in the world, you're not of the world. Don't think that just because you're the salt and light of the world, that the world is going to become salt and light. And here's the thing. The world, when you touch the world, you will become unclean. You will become unholy. No, well, Pastor, come on. We're in this world. We got to live like the things of this world. We got to look like the people of the world. God says, yeah, you'll be unclean. This picture applies in so many ways. I tell you what, can I just say it this way? It's hard to stay clean, isn't it? It's hard to stay clean. Or say it this way, it's hard to stay holy. We touch this world constantly. And here's the point that God is giving the priests, who are responsible of bringing the sacrifices and the offerings from the people unto the Lord. And what's the Lord saying? It's not good. The point is this: holy or holiness is not transferable, but unholiness is. Can I say that you as a holy parent cannot make your child holy? Can I say you as a holy spouse cannot make your spouse holy? I've illustrated it this way. I remember as a teenager, or when I was a youth pastor, I would teach our teens this simple principle. I would say, okay, if you have a person down there on the floor, and you have me up here, and we grab each other's arms, is it easier for me to pull that person up as the holy one? I'm not meaning me hold. Okay, just the illustration. Be the holy one, pulling that person up, or is it easier for that person to pull me down? It is always easier to be unclean than clean. To be unholy than holy. That's what God is saying. And as soon as your body, your holy body, touches anything, this is Levitical law, that is unholy. Remember the story of Samson. Samson was a mess. Because Samson was so worldly, so consumed with the things of this world. And what happened? He went and on his route, he killed this bear, this lion, and what? As he kills it, it's laying there in the road, and he goes on, does his thing in the city. He returns back, and on his return back, there's that lion. And whoa, guess what's inside that lion? Now, who is Samson? He's the Holy One. He's the judge. He's the one who has taken this Nazirite vow. What does he do? As a Nazirite, you're not to touch anything unclean. Well, what's inside that carcass of the lion? There's what? There's honey. Why? Because bees got in there and they start forming their hive and they start producing honey. And Samson walks by and says, whoa, that looks good. And he did what immediately happened. The holy became unholy. It goes on his merry way. What happens? He defiles the rest. And can I say, that happens far too often with us as Christians. We don't think anything about it. We think that, hey, last night, Saturday night, I can watch any movie I want, and then Sunday morning I can come, and I can sing a pew, and I can worship God, and everything's okay. Really? Really? I can fight with my spouse, I can fight with my kids, I can fight with my parents. And you know what? Never confess it before God, and everything's what? Fine. Why? Because I'm in the holy place. God says no. Remember Jesus taught, hey, listen, if you have an ought with your brother, before you offer anything, you confess before God. Oh, so easy. And what? We expect God to bless. God says, I'm not blessing that. Second point that we see is not only the picture that he gives to us now, Haggai has a responsibility as the prophet to make application for the people. So look at the application, the problem that he points out to them. Look at the problem, beginning in verse number 14. Then answered Haggai and said, so is this people, and so is this nation before me, saith the Lord, and so is every work of their hands, and that which they offer there is unclean. I want you to consider very well that before you put the first brick down on this project, 15 years ago, you laid offerings out. These holy offerings and these sacrifices did not make you clean in my sight. Why? Because those offerings could not impart holiness to you. Remember, holiness is not transferable. Unholiness is. Why? Because even though you offered the sacrifices, you were what? You're unclean. That's the whole point. Consider your ways. Consider your ways. Consider what you're doing. Consider who you are. You're an unclean people, and you're trying to offer me things. So what's the problem? The real question that he asks is this. What is it that made you unclean? Remember, as I said, these people, they were not wicked. They were not sinful. They weren't out there pursuing idolatry as their forefathers. They weren't out there committing adultery as their forefathers. They weren't committing murders as their forefathers. What is it that made them unclean? Misplaced priorities. You see, here's what can happen with us as believers today. We can sit there and say, yeah, you know what, I'm not out there, I'm not carousing. I wasn't at the bar last night. I wasn't getting drunk. I wasn't sexually immoral this week. I didn't yell at my kids. I didn't steal from my boss. You know what? I misplaced my priorities. I said, you know what? I think I'm going to start doing this now, and I'm going to arrange for this to happen, and I'm going to set this up. And, you know, I mean, God's house, God's word, I mean, that's not really that important to me. I mean, I'll get to that later. Can I just say it this way? Does life happen to you like it happens to me? busy, doesn't it? It gets hectic. It gets crazy. Can I say, if I don't spend my morning in pursuit of God, it gets away from me. That's just me. I like to have my quiet times in the morning. That's me. If you say, man, I can't do it in the morning, I'm too groggy and too crouchy, there's no possible way I can get anything out of it, okay, fine. Then in your priority is to do it in the evening or whatever time, before you go to bed, fine. Don't let anything rob that. It's easy to happen. Well, I'm just going to watch this show, I'm going to watch this movie, and what? The time just slips away. And it doesn't just simply become whether or not I read my Bible. It's what? God. It's all about Him. God, it's you. And throughout the day, God, I just want to consider you. God, does this activity, does this idea, does this thought, God, does it please you? At the heart of holiness is separation or dedication unto God. You see, the real problem that they faced was that they would not turn to God. You say, how do we know it? Because it wasn't important for them to build a temple. And again, remember, it's not about the structure. God's not interested in them putting bricks on top of one another. It wasn't the fact that God is so consumed with, hey, you need to make sure you go and get the gold and the silver and make sure that everything's laid out perfectly and overlaid properly. No, it's not that. It's what? It's me. It's not the structure, it's the sovereign. It's not the system, it's what? It's the sovereign. And you guys have left me. Remember again the church at Ephesus. What was their problem? They've left their first love. Can I say, your first love better not be your spouse. Your first love better not be that child. Your first love better be Jesus Christ. And when that's the case, everything else will fall into place. What does he say? Now, this is serious. Verse number 15, he says, And now I pray you consider from this day and upward, from before a stone was laid upon a stone in the temple of the Lord, since those days were when one came to a heap of 20 measures, there was but 10. When one came to the press vat for to draw out 50 vessels of the press, there were but 20. Why? Because I smote with blasting, with mildew, and with hail in the labors of your hands, yet ye turned not to me. That's your problem. Do you realize, and here's the point, you can sit in a pew and not be turned to God. You can be reading your devotions and not be turned to God because it's just words on a page or words on a device. The whole point is what? My relationship with God. Your lack of desire for my temple was only an indication that you had turned away from me. That's what God is saying. It's an indication. This nation is unclean. The offerings that they offer are what? Unclean. They become defiled. Why? Because they've been handled and offered by an unclean people. That which is holy became unclean. Why? Because it was touched by an unclean person. Remember the picture. In essence, that pew, this sanctuary, can be unclean because of an unclean people touching it. That song we sang, if my heart is not turned to God, just words on a page. I can mouth words all I want. last thought. And this is when personal devotion to the Lord was absent. Nothing went right. So when things aren't going right, you know what? Here's the reality. We could just be asking the question. Am I personally devoted to God? Am I humbly devoted to God? Personal devotion to the Lord was absent. Nothing's right. Now, does that mean, though, that when things aren't right, it's because I'm not personally devoted to God? No, you can still be personally devoted to God and things don't go right. Why? Because your ways are not God's ways. Because God might be teaching you something. So don't just sit there and say, oh man, I've got this going wrong, this is happening, this, man, oh man, I must not be personally devoted to God. No, Jesus was personally devoted to God, and guess what? Did things go right from man's perspective? He even prayed, what? Let this cup pass from me. Learn that the truth is God's ways are not our ways, but His ways are higher and better and greater. God, if that's what you want to do, hey, I'm personally devoted to you. So what do we find? Lastly, we see the promise. So verse 18, consider now. This is the second time he uses the word consider in this text. First time came back up in, where's it at? Anyway, verse 15. And now I pray you consider, from this day upward, verse 18, consider now from this day and upward, from the 24th day of the 9th month, even from the day that the foundation of the Lord's temple was laid, consider. Third time, consider. Pay attention, listen up. Here's the question, verse 19, is the seed yet in the barn? And you have to understand, the agriculture of that day and of that place is kind of flipped from ours. In the early part of the year is when you harvest. The latter part of the year is when you do all the sowing and planting and all this. This is now, guess what? Here's the key. December. This is December. Which means what? The seed is to be planted. That's already being in the ground. So here's the question. Is the seed still in the barn? Okay? What does that mean? Give me one of two things. Either God is saying to them, hey, guys, listen, pay attention. Why in the world aren't you doing anything? You've kind of given up. The seed's still in the barn. You were supposed to plant that 2 months ago. You mean you didn't prepare the soil? And then you haven't sown that? What's going on here? Or, question number 2. You're going to trust me. You get things right. And therefore what? The seed. Meaning what came out of that seed. The produce. It's in the barn. So, I like to see it as, guys, you're not doing your job. Just notice what he says. Verse 19, here's the seed. The vine, the fig tree, pomegranate, the olive tree, hath not brought forth. Why isn't, or why hasn't these things been brought forth? And the reality is this. You could have gone through the motions. You could be in here, quote unquote, worshiping God. And yet you're not. Here's the promise. The key here is what? The past is in the past. For 15 years, you have been offering. And it's done nothing. Well, since you started building 2 months ago. seeds in the water. The produce is coming. Why? Because I promise you, as I've told you before, I will bless you. What do we find from this? A couple thoughts real quickly. Remember what Haggai had already said back in chapter number 1, that if they worked, they would have plenty of food. Right now they're what? Man, you're harvesting only 10. You're only half. Or go from 50 down to 20. That's less. But from, keep these words in verse 19, these ought to be key words. Underline them, circle them, whatever it might be. From this day. From this day. Not what you started 15 years ago. But from this day, when you started obeying me and making things right with me. Remember, it's not about building the temple. It's about what? Putting your priorities in place. The reason that their barns and vats were still empty, even though they had worked now for 2 months now, was because the fall months reflected the earlier crops. And guess what? Come this next spring, you're going to have plenty of crops. I will bless you. Absolutely, positively, I will bless you. Blessings come from obeying God. These same messengers will give testimony to the abundant blessings of God. Immediately, why? From this day on. One commentator said this: as the temple goes up, his blessings come down. Why? Because yes, it's not about the brick, it's not about the mortar, it's not about those things, it's about what? The fact that you recognize, remember what the temple was a picture of, or representation of my presence. Now that's become important. Does that become important to us? And is that important to us? God's presence, God's power in my life, God's purposes and God's plans, God's program. God, I just want you, and I want whatever you want. Jesus prayed that way, right? Nevertheless, not my will, but God, yours be done. That's all I want. And as a result, blessings will flow. So as we close, wrap this up, there are tremendous truths, I believe, that we need to keep in mind. 3 things I want to leave you with this morning. Number 1, unclean people cannot offer anything that is clean to the Lord. If you're here this morning and you're unclean, that is, if you're unsaved, you can put $1 million in our offering plate. I'll take it, but the Lord won't. You can think, I'm okay with God. And you know full well, I don't care about people here. Matter of fact, I just wish you'd hurry up and get done. Serious? Is that my heart? That's saved. Your heart is far from God. Yet you can be present. One thing I thought of, how many secular, unregenerate musicians, singers, artists, whatever we want to call them, sing hymns in order to sell a CD. And God's people buy them. That's not holy. I know I'm just picking on one thing, but boy, that just bothers me. I see, I know I'm going to step on some toes here. Elvis Presley singing gospel hymns, and that's okay? And that's good? You think God accepts that? I think he says, oh, you can't say that, that's the king. No, he's not. principle here. Right? We need to be very careful. Unclean people cannot offer anything that is clean to the Lord. Second closing thought is this. Past disobedience renders every spiritual exercise vain until our hearts are right with God. From this day, it's going to be good. Why? Because now I know where your heart is. Listen, we all have a past, don't we? And until I reckon the past in the past, and my present condition is my heart is right with God, I don't care what sacrifices I make. It's vain. Until my heart is right. The last thought I want to leave us is this. Obedience to God brings blessings. Obedience to God brings blessings. Here's the question. Are you ready? Are you able to receive His blessings because you know your heart is right? God, I know. I'm not perfect. But God, I know that my heart is right. God, I love you with all my heart. God, you are my priority. It's not about building houses, my house. God, I just want your presence in my life. Is that your heart? Is that where you're at? I hope so. If not, can I just say simply, you can repent of that today. Can I encourage you? Repent of it today. Don't make a false repentance. Don't just offer something and say, okay, God, everything's going to be fine. No, my heart has to be right. Where does that begin? It begins with a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. I've accepted this gift of salvation. Heads bowed and eyes closed. Father, we thank you and praise you so much. God, for your word. We thank you for the truth. Father, we realize, God, that there is kind of a conundrum that we find ourselves in. Because though I may sit here in a pew, doesn't mean that I'm right with God. Yet on the flip side of that, sitting in the pew, leaving the comfort of my home on a Sunday morning or a Sunday evening, that is a testimony. God, you are a priority in my life. Father, we know that we can only see the outside. God, you see the heart. You know our hearts. God, we realize that our hearts are deceitful. God, we can never deceive you. Heads bowed and eyes closed this morning. I wonder, in the quietness of your own heart, if you would say, Pastor, I know I'm not saved. I know it. 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 And I know it. I know it. I've been pretending for far too long. I've been playing games, but I know my heart is far from God. Pastor, this morning God has dealt with me. I want to make it right. I want to be born again. If that's you this morning, would you just slip your hand up and indicate that God has dealt with me about that matter? Heads are bowed, eyes are closed, no one is looking around. If you're like that this morning, would you just slip your hand up and say, Pastor, I acknowledge that. I want to be saved. I need to be saved. I'm ready. Christians, can I ask you? Where's your heart? Your heart is what God is after. Seeking Him, loving Him with all our hearts. Father, thank you again for your word. Thank search our hearts, Father, to examine ourselves and to see if there be any wicked way in us. God, thank you for your word. Thank you for the truth of it. Lord, thank you for a personal relationship that we can have with you through your Son, Jesus Christ. Father, it's not any merit of our own. It's not because we showed up at a church service. God, it's because we have pursued you with all our